It's John Bowden from Rocky Street Music. Sometimes there's very obvious reasons why artists stop playing with each other. Sometimes they just don't like each other. They spend too much time in the same tour bus. But many artists through the years have told me, in the last 40 years, they've said that sometimes when money gets involved, things get sticky. Things get at least more complicated. The reason why Lee Holdridge, who did all the great string arrangements on a lot of Neil Diamond hits, including the beginning and the rest of Hot August Night, the reason why he stopped working with Neil Diamond, it's a very specific, tough story. On Rocky Street Music, first a little on Lee Holdridge. He came from the tropics but made his mark in Hollywood. From symphonic suites to silver screen soundtracks, Lee Holdridge was orchestrating deep emotion. Born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti in 1944, Lee Elwood Holdridge was raised between musical cultures. Earlier on, Holdridge showed promise not just as a musician, but as a composer. He studied violin seriously as a child, but it wasn't until a move to Los Angeles that things started to explode. In the early 1970s, Holdridge broke into Hollywood with quiet determination and quickly found a niche. He began scoring TV movies and miniseries, catching the attention of rising stars and veteran directors alike. A pivotal moment came when he started working with Gordon Lightfoot. In 1966, For Love and You. The following year, Bitter Green. That was his orchestration on Song for a Winter's Night in 1967. And the same year, the Canadian Railroad Trilogy. There was also the classic Softly by Gordon Lightfoot. Then in '69, he started working with Neil Diamond on the album Touching You, Touching Me. The following year, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother, that was from Taproot Manuscript. Songs like Song Sung Blue from Moods in 1972, as well as Play Me. One of his greatest early contributions has to be the orchestration on one of the greatest live albums of all time, Neil Diamond's Hot August Night from 1972. That intro to that record stands up as one of the top openings of not only any live album, but any album in the history of music. And then 1973 with Jonathan Seagull, the soundtrack by Holdridge and Neil Diamond for that classic Richard Bach book. In 1973, Lee Holdridge was doing his magic for John Denver, a relationship that would last for so many years. That was him painting the mood on Farewell Andromeda, Welcome to My Morning. And two from 1974 with Denver, An Evening with John Denver, and Back Home Again, which featured Any Song, the title song, and Sweet Surrender. In '75, Holdridge and Denver created Wind Song with Calypso, Fly Away featuring Olivia Newton-John, and Looking for Space. And let's not forget the latter part of '75 where John Denver and Lee Holdridge released Rocky Mountain Christmas. There were other albums by Anne Murray, Stephen Bishop, and more from John Denver. He worked with Placido Domingo quite a bit in the 80s, as well as Diana Ross, Laura Branigan, Barbra Streisand again, Dionne Warwick, and many others. And let's talk about his soundtrack work and his TV work, including American Pop in '81, The Beastmaster the following year, Mr. Mum, the Michael Keaton comedy in '83, and Splash the following year. His TV work was immense. Highlights included Moonlighting, Beauty and the Beast, and When Calls the Heart. Yet through the accolades, Holdridge remained more interested in the work rather than the spotlight. He scored documentaries, animated features, and even classical concert pieces. For Lee Holdridge, music wasn't about fame. It was about storytelling. How did the Neil Diamond thing happen? What was the...
Well, I was doing some arranging for some producers at RCA Records in New York during the late '60s, and one of the producers was a big Neil Diamond fan, and he kept using Neil Diamond songs for his different singers. And I arranged a couple of them, and unbeknownst to me, that he loved the arrangements that I did, but unbeknownst to me, Tom Catalano was a good friend of his. And he played one of the records for Tom Catalano, and Tom Catalano played it for Neil Diamond. And they really loved it. I forget what the record was, but not long after that, I got a call from Tom Catalano. He said, Neil would love to have you come do some arrangements for him. He's going to go to LA for the first time. So that's when they invited me to come out. It was 1969. Can you believe it? And the first song I worked on was a song called Holly Holy. And I heard the track and I said, "Oh my gosh, it's just one long E major repetition." So what are we gonna do with this? But you notice it's a very subtle thing, but the strings keep making little variations as the record goes, and it seemed to help it, you know. And that got me the gig, so to speak. They were very impressed. They loved it. So I did a lot of stuff with him after that.
I don't know if you remember me playing this. I played her Hot August Night. She didn't cry. I mean, I play it once a
Yeah.
week. I don't know what it was in that moment playing it for my mother. I started crying again. I remember the first reaction I had to when you really kick in and Dennis St. John comes in with boom,
Right,
boom,
right, right.
may he rest in peace wherever he is. I love Dennis St. John. I mean, as a
Yeah,
drummer,
yeah,
big
yeah,
man, big drums.
yeah. Yes, exactly. Very much so.
Must have performed at the Greek before Hot August Night, or had you?
No, I hadn't. That was my first time. But that opening was very unusual for Hot August Night. You know, that really got everybody's attention. And I don't know, you know, they didn't they said, can we start small with strings and build? And I said, okay. And I just wrote that thing. I sat down and wrote it and we played it and they said that's perfect. And it led into that, you know,
Crusher
tremolo
granola.
lost nothing, and then the drums, everything comes crashing in like that. And then Neil Diamond comes through the smoke onto the stage. I tell you something, John, I in my mind, that's when Neil Diamond became a mega star. When he stepped on that stage in Hot August Night, the formulas after that changed. And I was there to witness it. You know, you see it happen. It's like the universe has a chemistry and say, okay, the minute he went through that smoke and came out on that stage, it was a different world after that. Same thing with Placido Domingo. The minute he did that duet with John Denver, it was a different world after that. He was well known as an opera singer and respected as an opera singer, but that duet changed everything. Changed everything. All of a sudden, he was like a star. You know, I mean, people would go to the opera that had never been to the opera before just to see him. You know.
What's the whole thing? Was it Jonathan Livingston Seagull where Neil didn't want to give you
It
credit?
was Jonathan Livingston Seagull. That was after Hot August Night.
Yeah.
In a strange way, we became a little full of ourselves after that, if you know what I'm saying. And 1973, he says, I'm doing this film score. Jonathan Livingston Seagull said, okay, great. He said, I want you to do the arrangements. Okay, great. So I'm sitting waiting to be handed music to write these arrangements, and nothing shows up. And the producers are saying, well, we got to score the film. We got to score the film. So I started taking little pieces of the songs, you know, like 8 bars here and making big, long pieces out of it. And when you make a 5 minute work out of 8 bars, you got to add a lot of original material to it because you can't keep repeating those 8 bars over and over and over again. You got to do something with it. You got to develop it. You got to add another counter theme. You got to bring new themes in. I did all of that stuff. You know, that whole sequence where Jonathan Livingston Seagull flies off and, you know, he makes the journey. It's like a 5 minute cue. And I was doing all this work and I started to say, hey, any chance I could get some credit here, you know, for what I've done? And it was always met with like a silence, you know. And the bottom line is, I felt that they sort of took that away from me. I didn't want credit for the songs. I said, Neil, they're your songs. Okay, fine. But why don't you say the score was written by the two of us, even though I did 95% of the work. But I said, let's just call it the two of us. End of story. Music score by, you know, it would have been very simple. And he kind of shot himself in the foot because he wouldn't do that. The Academy he wouldn't recognize me. The Academy didn't accept the score for submission. And that score could have been a shoe-in, John. That would have been, and they had a category at that time for what they called the background score in a musical. If you had songs, you could submit the songs, but you could also submit the background score. We would have walked away with that thing. but he wouldn't do it. He absolutely did not want to share credit.
And never
And
did?
he never did. I have a credit on the film says that I did all the arrangements, but I actually wrote a lot of that music. But so it wasn't fair. But I grew up after that because then I realized, some of my friends said, you better get an agent, get someone who'll fight for you, because I didn't understand that that's what
Yeah.
I thought people were honorable and would honor their agreements, but it didn't happen that way.
Is that part of the way you were raised? Is that your parents instilled that on you?
Well, I never was. I didn't grow up thinking that there were a lot of evil people out there. You know what I mean? It was not a question of evil. It was just a question of like fair is fair. That's all.
Mhm.
Neil, we're not asking for something beyond what I'm asking for. I thought my request was very fair,
Yeah.
but he didn't understand that. Years later, we sort of, they did a documentary at the BBC, and I agreed to be interviewed for it, and I said only good things about him. I did not bring up all this stuff. And I said some very nice things about him. And he actually wrote me a note and said, thank you very much. So, you know, you can't live your life, angry. It just doesn't work. I felt badly at the time because it could have been a huge career boost for me if I'd gotten the joint credit. But Hollywood is a big gossip town. Everybody knew what I did in that film. All the musicians were, we had 80-piece orchestras. They knew what was going on. They knew that I was writing most of it. So they all start yakking to everybody. So I got a call from a producer once saying, I want to score just like you wrote for Jonathan Seagull. I said, well, you mean Neil Diamond? He said, no, come on. I know you wrote that score. I mean, some total stranger says that to me. So, there you go. And I never, there was no bad thing about the songs. The songs were great. Neil, you wrote some great songs, but the score is something else. One of my proudest moments with Neil Diamond was they wanted him to do some cover songs, other people's songs. And I really liked his voice. I felt he had a kind of really nice, moody baritone. And I convinced him to do Randy Newman's I Think It's Going to Rain Today. And he agreed to come into the studio and let me do it live with him. He never really recorded live, but that song, if you listen to it, we did it live. He's in the studio singing while we're doing the track. And I love that because I think there's a vibrancy about it. And he's wonderful doing that song. And I'm one of the few people that understood Randy Newman's harmonies because they're very 20th century, Samuel Barber, Aaron Copland type harmonies, and I knew immediately what he was doing, so I knew how to voice him properly because I had heard other versions of that song and they kind of generally messed up on the harmonies. In that song, if you do the harmonies exactly the way Randy Newman played it on the piano, it works gangbusters.
How did it end with you and Neil? When were you just getting busy? Like,
Well, after the Jonathan Livingston Seagull situation, we couldn't really work together. So we kind of parted ways, and the film did help launch my career. I mean, after that, I started getting a lot of calls to do stuff. So, things went on their own from there. But that's fine, whatever. We live and we learn.
you're in an office, some guy looks at you, doesn't recognize you, but he looks at you and he says, so what do you do? Do you go there? Because your story is not 30 seconds. I mean,
People ask me, I just say I'm a composer. That's what I say.
yeah, but the next question is, would you have done anything I know? That's obviously the next question.
Well, I say, well, I've done a couple of well-known films like Splash and, Mr. Mom and a few big comedy hits of the 80s and 90s. And I did some TV shows. Moonlighting is my song. I wrote the music to that. Al Jarreau wrote the lyric. And we actually had a top 20 record with that. And so in the television Beauty and the Beast the music was very successful for that, and gave Disney the idea to do Beauty and the Beast,
Well,
But we were first.
Mr. Karen didn't think somehow you could get him, right?
He didn't. He didn't. We he brought me in early on the series, and I read the script, and he said, "Write 5 themes, what you think should go with the script." So I wrote 5 themes, and he gave me a budget. I went in the studio and recorded them. I and brought him the tape. He said, "Yeah, I really liked them, but I especially liked number 3, which was the instrumental of that song." And he was thinking, he said, "Well, I'd love to turn it into a song." And he said, "Maybe I can find someone to write a lyric." I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "Who's your favorite singer?" And he said, "Al Jarreau." He said, "This show is Al Jarreau." It's like, I said, "Well, let me see if I can get Al to write the lyric and sing it." He said, "Oh, that'll never happen." I said, "You got to be patient. Give me some time." It took me 3 months, but I got it done. Because Al was, "Oh, I'm going to Brazil. I don't have time right now. I got a tour in Brazil. Oh, no, I got to go to Japan."
He was a little
Al,
flighty.
yeah, Al, listen to the song. Listen to the music. Write a lyric. I kept on this, kept on it. He finally did. A week before the show was supposed to air, we recorded the track for the song. We went into a studio. I brought 5 great rhythm players. I brought Al. We cut the track. That's what went into the show.
Wasn't it released as an instrumental as well?
Well, I think we eventually put a sax player on it or something, but that track and the producer was having heart attacks. He said, "Lee, the show airs in a week." I said, "It's the record business. It marches to a different drummer." Somehow I got Al into the studio. I got a great rhythm section. We did the track. It all happened like right then and there. Al did his vocal. The rest is history. And then what happened was the show became a big hit. So I went to Warner Brothers and said, "Let's do a single." And Warner Brothers, you know what the executives at Warner Brothers said? They said, "We don't do television." But then Niles Rodgers came to the rescue. And because he was producing Al, and he said, "Hey, yeah, he made the record, the commercial version of it." But he listened to I sent him the charts that I use, and he used those.
You did When Calls the Heart, right? With Aaron Krakow.
I was the beginning composer on that. Yeah, I did the first season or something like that. And then they took it to Canada. And the Canadian government said, "Oh no, you have to hire Canadian composers." They have the content laws, which means if they're doing a series, if you're filming a series in Canada, you have to use Canadian talent, except for the actors, the headline actors. But you have to use all Canadian talent. England does the same thing. Australia does the same thing. All these places do that. We're the only country that says, "Oh no, come on in, make your movies, whatever."
Is there anything you can share about that working on that film?
Well, it wasn't. I worked on those 2 comedies literally back to back, Splash and Mr. Mom. Both of them are like iconic films from the 80s. And Mr. Mom was really fun, but there was something that wasn't working. They took it out on a preview and it was bombed. And they didn't know what to do. The producers were like scratching their head. And they brought it back to MGM and they got an old-time film editor that had edited a lot of the great comedies of the 30s and 40s. And they gave it to him. He recut the entire film and made it the film that it is today. He changed the tempo of it, the whole thing. I had to do a lot of rescoring because now the timings were all different. But I thought the film was a gem. I thought Splash was a gem. I thought Mr. Mom was a gem. And I've been proven right because those films are like timeless. Mr. Mom, you can watch it today. It still applies today.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
And that was John Hughes, the famous director. That was his first script. And I mean, some of the dialogue in that movie is like, when they ask Michael, when he says, "I'm rewiring the entire house." And he says, 220. He says, "Oh, 220, 240, whatever it takes." he didn't know what he was talking about. But
yeah.
and Michael Keaton was marvelous because he didn't overplay it. He was very funny, but he was very natural, if you know what I'm saying. It was a beautiful performance. Look, he's become a fantastic actor, hasn't he?
Remember, if you want to help the channel, you can make a donation. There's a PayPal link at the very top of the description. Join our Patreon. There are hundreds of hours of great clips that have not seen the light of day right now on YouTube that are on our Patreon pages. For $6 and change, you can get access to all of it. Links in the description, and or buy a t-shirt, a cap, a jacket at our swag store. Remember, if you subscribe, we want you to click the bell notification so you don't miss anything. Like our videos, comment on them, and share them on social media. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care.